this second show in the series on preparing for the inevitable, we are joined again by Joe Bastardi, his father Matt, and Garrett, and Herb Stevens, and Ron Moore. We're going to talk about the great hurricanes. We'll start by looking at the Atlantic Basin Accumulated Cyclone Energy Index over time, and we see there's spikes. There are big years, 1893, 1926, 33, 1953, is it? I guess. Looks like 1995, 2004, and 5, and 2017 were spikes. We don't necessarily see a trend. We do see cycles in it. The big years, top 10, included 3 in this century, 2004 and 5 and 17. But there were some way back in time, 1893, 1926, 1933, 1950s, with big accumulated cyclone energy information or data for the season. You can see the 2 big years, 1933 at the top, and second place was 2005. Were very similar in a lot of respects in the Western Atlantic, but before the satellite era, we didn't see the storms in the East, and it's likely they estimate maybe 15% higher ACE. It could have been something like 280 for 1933. In time, by decade, the number of landfalling hurricanes and major hurricanes has been a slight trend down. This decade was very quiet until 2017. We have had 10, and with 1 year to go, and we've had 3 major landfalls. We'll see where we end up after this year, but it is not a big, unprecedented decade by any means. Joe will and Herb and all of us know that Bill Gray talked about the AMO was key in Atlantic storms, and it's also the case for those that hit the East Coast. When the Atlantic is warm, you're more likely to get hurricanes making landfall. From the 38 to Donna in 1960, there were 8 landfalling storms. We'll talk about some of them today. And as the water started warming in the 80s, with brief cooling, with Pinatubo cooling, but then you see the hurricanes making landfall again along the East Coast in the warm mode. The return period on the storms is shortest where the land sticks out, obviously Florida and the Cape. But where it's concave, it's less. But interestingly, I see the return period for New York City for a major hurricane landfall is 74 years, and 1938 plus 74 is 2012, which is kind of interesting. It wasn't a major hurricane on landfall, but it certainly was a major hurricane, and its impact was major. We talked in the first show a little bit about the great colonial hurricane 1635 that struck Narragansett, similar to the hurricane of 38, on a track, though, heading toward the northeast. It surprised the colonists. It produced a storm surge of 14 to 20 feet. Hundreds of trees were toppled, homes destroyed, and ships blown off their anchors. And it's only 15 years after the colony was settled, so it wasn't a lot damage to do compared to modern day. The 1938 hurricane was very similar in the kind of descriptions of the destruction, and both are believed to be strong Category 3 hurricanes, and certainly in their impact. We saw this map, and the hurricane off the Bahamas is the 38 hurricane, and it moved very rapidly to the northeast. Once it got off the mid-Atlantic, in 12 hours it went from off of Hatteras to approaching Lake Champlain and heading toward Montreal. And tremendous wind to the east, a combination of the storm movement and the strong deep cyclone. Totally surprise to the people in the Northeast, not expecting a storm, and this is what happened. And you were there, Matt.
Yeah, I was told about that by my uncle. He told us from where he was standing at LaSalle Square. Uh, and also he could look down at the Providence Journal building, and he saw a lot of this. He heard these cars, the sirens, the horns on the cars were sounding off and floating around. He came back to the house where we lived at 117 Federal Street and told us about it. I wasn't a direct eyewitness account. I was only 9 years old at the time, but he told us about it. And
just so you could get your bearings there, the rounded building on the left, if you've been in downtown Providence, is City Hall. On the right, the taller structure is the old Biltmore Hotel, and both buildings sit on Kennedy Plaza, which is the center of the city of downtown Providence to this day. So you might, if you've been there before, you may recognize those two buildings.
And what we're concerned about for New England is the trees. 2 billion trees in New York and New England were downed in the hurricane of '38. This is Keene, New Hampshire. This is Keene, New Hampshire. So the roads are beautiful trees, there's nothing left. And this is Springfield, Vermont. And such a hurricane nowadays, we're not prepared for. We have many more trees than we had back then. This is 10 years, by the way, after they said that you could still see piles of trees from 1951 after the '38 storms. And in the mills here, this is trees that were 10 years after the hurricane of '38, downed by the hurricane. And this is a picture in the Boston Globe from Harvard Research that showed when was the trees were removed for farming on the left in the 1880s, and on the right when they grew back. And we showed the chart of the forest cover and the population increasing obviously with time. When we were farming and people cut down trees to clear and grow, and it declined until the late 1800s, and then it increased, and 80% coverage on average in all of New England currently of trees, and that's a lot of potential problems for the homes that are, in my neighborhood, every home has got beautiful trees surrounding it, and repeat of the hurricane of '38 would mean a lot of damage. You see the number of people in New England have increased from 88 million in 1938 to over 14, and probably over 15 in the 2020 census. And the problem is many of them are in areas most vulnerable to a storm that comes ashore in Long Island or central New England, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and moves north quickly. A lot of damage could be done. Hurricane Carol, we talked a little bit about in the first show. It came, and it was a surprise. We were out on Long Island at the time, and Matt, you said that there were some people believed that the storm was falling apart.
that's true. And Dave Garraway showed that morning. I heard it with my own ears. Frank Blair gave the forecast that Hurricane Carol was breaking up off the Mid-Atlantic coast and would pass, by afternoon, 150 miles southeast of the Cape Cod. And yet, 2 hours later, the center came over the southwestern corner, eastern corner of Connecticut, and once again, the city of Providence was flooded with close to 13 feet of water again, like the '38 hurricane.
Right.
Dave Garraway's show was the forerunner of the Today Show, correct?
Right.
So that show's been around a long time.
Yes, it really has.
Wow.
This is Kingman Yacht Club near the Cape. Beautiful. And back then, after the storm, it wasn't so. This was
Edgewood
Yacht
Yacht Club, Cranston, Rhode
famous
Island.
picture.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Carol, and perhaps the reason it was forecasted out to sea, was it was starting to veer. And, there was a tremendous amount of westerly flow across New England 36 hours before. And I think what happened was...
They receded northward very quickly.
Well, what happened was it was a trough interaction, it was a baroclinic interaction from the trough coming down, warm air feeding back, and it spun back and turned back in because I just saw that track.
You can see on the track how it bends and stalls.
It turned back up.
And then it had to have just gotten shoved, and then it got picked up.
That's always a tricky thing because in any hurricane, like a Joaquin, my company was the first company to say, no, this is not coming to the United States, that it would literally, because of what was going on in the Caribbean.
You're talking about
weather bell analytics, right? As opposed to Sandy, which, in all honesty, we had an 8 to 9 day call on Sandy. That was, you could see that was going to phase, because the height, it was interesting with Joaquin, the height rises were all to the southeast of the storm, and us older people, like what we call cork and stream, like figure out where the stream is. And the hurricane, as big as they look, they're just like corks that'll bob along in that stream, so you can figure that out. But maybe that's why, Dad, they thought at that, and you know, overnight, look at that, it's veering out. You know, as a kid, I grew up in Atlantic City. All the mornings I was crying when hurricanes were going out to sea instead of coming up to Jersey Shore.
It seems like there's a pattern of those storms where, like 38 also has that little veer to the right. Sandy had the veer to the right, where they kind of initially start getting pulled out and then they get ripped in by the trough and then they interact with it.
But that interaction is tough.
Yeah.
One picture, Joe, that we don't have there, I recall this picture, it's in the book that I have, hurricane book. It's just a pile of twisted ships piled on Fox Point. They're all piled on top of one another. And I'm surprised.
Fox Point is just to the right of the main axis of Narragansett Bay. It's about not even a mile east of downtown Providence, so it was subject to the storm surge up the bay and just piled up the boats.
Yeah.
And Carol, I was a young boy on near Asheroken on Long Island Sound, and we woke up in the morning to driving rain and wind and water breaching over the top of the sand dunes, and having all my toys and lawn furniture floating, and we called the police station and said, should we evacuate? He said it was too late. And he said, may God be with you. Go up to the second floor, and hopefully, you know, we'll talk to you next week.
Very little is written, Joe, about the 1944 hurricane because it was during World War II.
Right.
But that hurricane smashed the heck out of Cape Henry, Virginia, 150 mile an hour winds. And once it got up to our latitude, it had petered down to maybe like a Cat 1. It came in at low tide, the 44 hurricane.
The 44 hurricane was vicious. It has 600-mile diameter of hurricane force wind. I mean, I can't even comprehend that. And what was weird is, and as you know, I have a theory on the forward movement of the storm. I don't believe you get that strong wind because the storm is moving that fast. Norm Macdonald said it's not a curveball through space. You have the strong wind on the east side because you are lining up the flow. You see what I'm saying? That the downward transfer of momentum in the hurricane can occur. But what was crazy about 44, a gust to 156 out of the north at Cape Henry, I can't even believe it. 134 sustained, gust to 156 with a storm that's moving up. And I'll tell you, Dad and I talk about this all the time in Atlantic City. There were reports of a 20 to 30 foot storm surge that just wiped out every boardwalk from Cape May up to Barnegat. And we believe, I think, that the storm was looping cycloidally and may have gotten very, very close to Atlantic City, because no storm 75 miles east of Atlantic City, I don't care who you are, is going to produce that kind of storm surge into Atlantic City. But it was much less, of course, up here in New England, that particular case. So 44 is a beast.
We're going to tour the country a little bit and show you that nothing's new in weather, and storms do repeat after a period of time, not exactly the same, of course. And everybody remembers Katrina, certainly. And Camille in '69.
Yeah, in Camille, there's only one anecdote I remember from Camille, and there was actually a movie made about this. There was people who were partying in Biloxi in a Holiday Inn, and it was made out of cinder block. It was pretty standard construction materials for that part of the country. for hotels back in the 60s, and they found the full-size refrigerator that the suites at this Holiday Inn had 2 miles inland.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And they found cinder blocks 2 miles inland. But I have a question for Ron. If you were there in 1969, or for Katrina in 05, where would you feel safe positioning yourself in the face of either one of these two storms? Or would you even mess with it?
I would. I would be away from the coastline. I'd probably be pretty near the front right quadrant where it's coming in because I'd want to get in the maximum wind field and stuff. But I'd be away from the water. We never position ourselves in a place where we're going to be. For instance, I'll use Michael for instance. Just recently, I know that area really well because part of my master's thesis was on Mexico Beach. I had taken pictures of it beforehand, and I always told my wife, I said, "There's no way I'd go there because it's just a slab. The whole town is. It's in a path where something happens, and some of the construction was not the greatest. I'd be in East Panama City, which is where most of the chasers went this last time. Yeah.
Joe, you want to mention something about Hurricane Rita at the time of Katrina? The 40-mile difference made Houston could have got married.
Oh yeah, well the interesting thing about Rita is Rita in 2005 did not come out of the tropics. Rita was the tropical upper tropospheric trough, a trough dug south in the central Atlantic, fed back and became Rita. Rita never was an African wave. So I saw this going on, and I actually posted on our blog when I was working for AccuWeather, Houston, we have a problem. That was 10 days before. And what happened with me was in 2004 with Ivan, I had it going into Mobile for 8, 9, 10 days, and I shifted it on a Saturday morning because all the model suites were like east of Apalachicola. And then sure enough, it came back there. So with Rita, as Rita was coming, and I tell people all the time that somehow or the other I got blamed for some things in Rita that were not my fault. So I had it going into Galveston, and I kept it at Galveston. But the hurricane tracks started at La Pesca, then went to Brownsville, then went to Corpus, and Thursday morning is when the panic started in Houston, when the track, the official track, was right over Galveston, right? So that track matched the long-standing track that we have. Now, I don't like changing forecasts around. So what happened was it wound up going 40, 50 miles further east than the original forecast. And people are sitting around, wow, it's because of this guy Bastardi that, everybody was on the road going to Houston. No one, getting out of Houston, no one cared about it until that Thursday morning when the path was all the way up to
Joe,
Galveston.
as long as they don't take our name in vain.
Oh, but I'm just saying that.
Well, and there was also an effect of it was just after Katrina,
Right.
So, Houston's closest major city is New Orleans,
Yep.
and they just got wrecked,
Freaked out.
and they're probably freaking out. So, if there's a hurricane in the Western Gulf, regardless of where your forecast is, really, whether it goes into Beaumont or Houston, people are going to panic.
Yeah.
But-
Well, again, if I've documented this. If you took the history of the tracks, I'm not trying to be critical to. I love the National Hurricane Center. I'm not trying to be critical, but it was when that track shifted to a long-standing track that my company had that's when all started going crazy over there. Yeah, same thing with Gilbert. Mayor Galveston claimed, I was on the air at 4:25 in the morning with Ben Oldag and these two Aggie guys. I go, what do you think this storm's going to do? Could it break the ridge? I said, yeah, it's possible it could break the ridge, but I don't really think so. And I hear that, and this is what happens if you're in the private sector. The rules are you cannot make a mistake. You can't do you're going to kill people. I've had people tell me that before. I had a guy tell me in Brownsville, all right, with Brett. With Brett in Brownsville, 99, I was on in the Lower Rio Grande Valley, and the panic was Beulah's coming. They had a Category 4 going in at Laguna Madre and bisecting the Lower Rio Grande Valley. All right, so I said, no, I think that this is going to come up east and go into Kennedy County, which has more cattle than human beings, right to the north. And I'll never forget, after that happened, and the Lower Rio Grande Valley was spared, I have this letter in my mailbox. And it says, one of these days, smart guy, you're going to be wrong and you'll be sorry. That was the thanks I got from some people down there. So it's a crazy situation sometimes.
You sound like you're in ministry or something.
I remember I was in the 05 season. I was 9, and I was in AccuWeather probably every day from Dennis, from mid-July all the way through Wilma in October. I was pretty much there every day, and I remember that the recon data was coming in with Katrina, and every time the recon data came on, all the computers in AccuWeather they'd beep. You remember that?
Yeah.
You'd hear it, and there was a system where it wasn't refreshable all the time in 05. It was like on this like little, I don't even know what it was, what you guys would post on or whatever, but you'd have to type in this code, and the Vortex data message would come in, and not 902 millibars came in.
Yeah, and then
And about 48 hours before it was going to make landfall, and there was like audible gasps in the office, because it was just, they're like, this is actually happening. Like,
Now-
it is a Cat 5. It is going to New Orleans.
Yeah, but-
and it was just what?
Well, I wanted to interject the Rita story because I still owe you $1,000 over that. Remember,
Pay
what happened was when Rita's coming along, I hear Garrett in the background go, "Dad!" I was at work and I was getting ready to go on the air. The pressure's lower than Katrina was.
Oh, I remember
Right?
that. It
Right?
went to 897.
So I said,
and he's like, there's no way. There's no way. I'm like, I'm looking at it right here, and it was right before
But
you won
what was
CNBC.
funny was I was just about to go on, and I hear this loud cheer come out of the office because he was right. And
Yeah.
you imagine you're getting ready to do a hit 10 seconds before, and but you know, those hurricanes in 2005 is just one after another. You know.
Yeah.
And Camille is where it came in, and
There it is, a Richelieu.
Richelieu Apartments. They were partying.
Adios.
Yeah. Not a good idea to do.
Joe, was Camille, the kids had the hurricane party down the beach?
That's it right there.
That's it.
It was all, Camille was like
All of
a
them
very small
died.
storm. It wasn't nearly as bad in New Orleans. You know, it was 90 miles west-southwest.
Interesting, the rainfall that fell in Virginia.
My dad was actually
Yeah.
a police officer in Virginia Beach at that time before he became a minister, and he had to go help with that. He said the flooding, whole towns washing off
Yeah,
the
James.
mountainside.
Was that a product of like an southeast flow?
No,
just running
what
into in
happened
the
was
mountains
this
and just
baroclinic
upsloping?
zone. Again, you notice what happens when they're purely tropical.
Yeah.
The heavy precip is near the center and to the right.
Right.
But when the non-tropical events start occurring, because of the condensation processes of the trough, it's cooling, right? It rains harder.
So
to
you
the
had
west.
a shield, but you had a shield.
Yeah.
And what you'd have is just the tropical inflow of the Gulf Stream.
It got
Feeding
frontal.
back on itself.
You know, there was a frontal wave that came into it, but as soon as that son of a gun got off the coast, it spun right back up again. Camille, but went out to sea, obviously, to England.
You know, you bring up a good point that we should alert New Englanders to, especially in the state of New Hampshire, because if a storm comes to New England, and let's say it goes up across Rhode Island, eastern Connecticut, maybe goes out at Marblehead, for example, to the left of the track, when the baroclinic processes take over, southern New Hampshire would be prone to flooding rain.
Connie and Diana,
Diana, I was
right?
gonna
Dad?
mention that.
Connie
Yep.
and Diana are examples.
Yep.
Exactly.
55.
Yeah.
And even though Irene wasn't that strong when it comes to wind, once it got north of Atlantic City, Vermont was devastated because of the rain from the baroclinic zone.
A lot of uplifting.
Right.
So I kind of throw this in. So these wouldn't be unprecedented events then.
No.
These are things that have happened, and as
Yes.
we've said, are going to happen again, and we can know it by looking at this stuff and know how to prepare for it.
And I'll
That's
tell
the
you
key.
what, my thing with the weather is, why can't something even worse happen? It's 10% worse. I mean,
That's very negative of you, Jim.
People don't understand.
right.
You got to understand the
Prepare for the
power of
worst.
nature. I mean, you're dealing with essentially an infinite system that if it can bring everything together in one spot, guess what's going to happen? And that's what you see in some of these storms here.
Remember Katrina? The storm really developed in the islands and across Florida, and all the models consistently, right up until close of the energy market on Friday afternoon. They were all showing that it was going toward Apalachicola or the Panhandle, and but we on Wednesday kept saying every time we look at the model, the actual plot of the data, it's to the left of the model forecast, faster, and it's going over the warm water.
Yeah, that
tremendous
loop.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was on. The European came in at 2:10 in the afternoon and had the bullseye over New Orleans. It shifted its tracks. So I was on a CNBC show, and I said, "This is going to New Orleans, right?" And this was Friday, because you know what was very strange about Katrina? They kept saying it's moving 5 miles an hour through South Florida. And, you know, I wasn't the greatest mathematician, but 72 miles in 6 hours is 12 miles an hour. It did not bat an eyelash, and it was getting better organized, the outflow, as it came across Florida. So when that European came in, I was on the air, and because I said, if you're in New Orleans, get out.
You're on Hemmer's show.
Joe, you'll have all that 85-degree temperature in the Southeast Gulf.
I remember I always would talk to Dad after I was done with a hit, because I'd ask him, you know, if I talk to my mom, I could say it's snow and cheese and she thinks it's great, but Dad will tell me the truth. So I said, what do you think about that? And he goes, do you know that you just told people to get out of New Orleans, right? I was a guy, too, that when Ivan was coming, they tried to order 10,000 body bags for New Orleans. I mean, they were really, so no, it would fade off to the east. But that Friday was just, Friday afternoon, that European just came in and locked onto it.
For us, it was the first year of our hedge fund for energy trading. And at the beginning of the season, I said, this year smells like the Gulf is vulnerable. So I wrote a story about New Orleans. We looked at it, did our analysis, the main energy region, all of the, the platforms and so forth, and said, they're overdue. So we should prepare. And we started buying on Thursday. And they were laughing at our traders for buying. No, the storm's going to Apalachicola. You guys are going to lose your shirt. And our guys didn't buy as much as we told them to buy. But come Sunday evening, when the market opened up $2,
Yeah.
they were smiling and the other people
Ka-ching.
were.
You know, it's amazing, Joe, too, that Katrina, and I tell us all as people, it was not nearly a worst case scenario for New Orleans.
47 track.
A 47 track, a category 3 or 4, 1947, that comes in from the east-southeast between Lake Borgne and the mouth of the Mississippi. That you could build 25-foot levees. It's going to go over that, because remember,
Isaac in 2012 almost did it.
Well, it went south.
Right, but it was coming. It was
Right.
coming in, and it just veered south at
But
the end. And Gustav almost did it too.
The New Orleans, the situation in New Orleans was a pincer movement, and it was only a 9 to 13 foot surge back into Pontchartrain, and then the wind came from the northwest and blew it back in. So it was like I was on. I remember I came home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon from work, and my wife Jessica says to me, "Well, it doesn't look as bad in New Orleans as they said it was going to. You thought it was going to be." I go, "What are you talking about?"
Wait till the wind
Well,
shifts.
there was a guy on TV,
chef.
and a guy on TV. He's drinking beers down, Bourbon Street, or what is it in
yeah.
New Orleans?
Yeah,
and it had no idea what was going on with the levees being breached after that storm, because we always thought after it goes by, that's when you would really have problems in Pontchartrain. But 47 ever came in.
Mm-hmm. This is the city after the breach. Hugo.
No, that's Isabel.
I'm sorry.
Hugo went into charge.
You're right. That is Isabel.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
Joe. After that storm, I wrote that paper, the Philadelphia story, about that kind of track coming from the southeast, but hitting. If you took that track, or even Sandy was close, you hit at the mouth of the Delaware.
Right.
You're surging water up the Delaware, like Narragansett Bay, and down comes the flooding from the Delaware River. The ports of Philadelphia, Wilmington would go underwater.
Yeah.
I mean, just
This is Isabel. Quite
Yeah.
For that storm, I was in Hampton Roads. I was a mile from the beach, and we were. My friend I was staying with, his mom was 80 at the time. She had lived there her whole life. She was 4 generations there. The floodwaters came to the apartment complex around them. That had never happened before there. That's when the bridge, all the tunnels went under. And it was fierce there. I mean, Virginia Beach, all the trees were falling on the buildings.
Well,
all over the
33.
place.
33 hits again at Virginia Beach, the one that came in from the east-southeast.
Yep.
You know, it's kind of funny looking at the pictures of the people at 33. Like there's all water piled up and people are just rowing boats around. But 33, that 33 storm that came from the east-southeast. And look, here's what would happen in our house when I was a kid. Dad would start with Joe, we're going to see the shortcut storm sometime in our lifetime, the one that comes from the southeast and hits right into the mid-Atlantic states, right? So I was always listening to that and always looking for that. And then you get the 33 hurricane, there were wind gusts to 100 miles an hour all the way up to Long Island with that. It was like Sandy on steroids.
Florence was close
Florence.
this past year.
Yeah.
It was close.
Well,
it was
okay.
up, but it was so far north it got blocked up. You get a storm that far north.
Yeah.
If it just veers up at the end
Yeah.
instead of getting shoved south.
Yeah, I mean, I think
That's right.
That's the one storm I hold against Joe Bastardi.
Why is
Florence. I went down there for that. Me and Josh, we got position. We were down there, and you said, "Yeah, this is going to weaken coming in." And I said, "I rebuke you."
Well, it did
You can see
weaken coming
it did.
in,
It did.
Yeah.
It, was,
Well,
it, was
it
a, it was
weakened-
a major. Now the surge was bad and still and
Do you
everything.
know why?
We were in the eyeball
The
too.
reason why these things are weakening coming in, all right, is that when barometric pressures over the United States because of warming, all right, are actually lower in the summer seasons. That ruins convergence. One thing we look for is if I see weather maps with a lot of high pressure on it, and we used to, John Kerry used to say, predict the high, you predict the storm. If you have a lot of high pressure, like in New England in '54, the big highs just kept coming across the north. That's very different from what happens when storms are coming out of the tropics. And you got Eric Blake from the National Hurricane Center. I was at a conference one time, and he says, you have to understand these are delicate systems. We don't think of it that way, but as far as getting these things to operate perfectly, when the convergence of when Florence got over, it's over this warm water, it's abnormally warm, but the pressures were low to the north, the storm begins to spread out. And I didn't really catch that until 2 or 3 days before.
You did a pretty good job for it. We still went for it because we knew it'd be a good hurricane. It was a record hurricane for Wilmington, as it were. I think the winds were 109, and we were 3 miles from the
Well,
airport.
Josh, on Weather Bell, on September 2nd, that's 2 weeks before, the JMA came in, had all the blue into the Atlantic basin, a lot of upward motion.
Right.
And what I told our tropical clients was, if Florence turns out to sea, there will be something anyway developing there, right? And what happened was, of course, the GFS kept taking it out to sea. Once the European caught it on the 6th. But, it was one of those things like Ginger in '71, which came all the way back. Ginger was over 2,000 miles out at sea. So southeast of Bermuda came all the way back. You had that blocking ridge over the north of Newfoundland.
Wasn't the official forecast for so many storms in my mind right now, but to curve and miss in Florence? Was it supposed to all come off?
Well, originally, yeah.
Yeah, because
way out.
Then the flooding. I'm looking at the epic flooding, calling friends and telling them, and even that they were like, "Yeah, they're saying this, but these numbers are too high, 40-some inches." Well, that's what ended up happening.
No,
we were there for that. It pounded it.
The European
We barely
was
made it
on
through
that.
certain roads, man. They were closing roads down behind us.
There was
space. Go ahead.
Oh, no, well, there was just there was a couple images on Twitter, just guys I follow and stuff, and there was just the radar loop of it backing southwest along the South Carolina coast, and everybody's like, well, we can check this off the list of things we'd never thought we'd see, a hurricane backing southwest along the east coast.
It's interesting. You know what's fascinating about that? The vector analysis of storms are very, very important. Like John Kerr at Penn State used to always say, a lot of times these storms won't go in because they won't go into the mid-Atlantic states because the frictional effects of the coast,
Right.
You weaken the wind on one side, you strengthen it on the other, it creates an eddy, it wants to move along. That was the exact opposite going on, where the system had to follow the South Carolina coast to a certain place and then turn into the northwest.
There's a track of Florence.
And there's that bend.
So what Josh and I had to do, we had to make a decision. Remember that? We were deciding, do we stay or go? And I told him, I said, if we stay for 10 more hours, we're stuck here. We're not going to get out for weeks, which it did indeed happen. It locked off the whole state, every interstate. We were on whatever the main drag is there up to the center of the state. South of Raleigh, it took out the highway behind us.
For that rain.
And I mean literally, we made it out just in 5 minutes.
Purple rain.
I can't imagine there's been very many storms that have gone from a 4 to a tropical storm to a 4, and it didn't weaken because of land.
Yeah, oh, you're right. You're right. You're right.
And
That's a
Joe,
good observation.
New Bern, we were up there. Had a lot of friends
With
all through
regard to
there.
Hurricane Hazel, hitting Pennsylvania and up to Lake Ontario, winds over 100 miles an hour. Was it non-tropical then, or was it still tropical?
It depends on how you define it. I mean, it's the same thing with Sandy. You know, 20 minutes before landfall, it's
Right.
post-tropical, right? And as my dad will tell you, because he was over Sandy, there was a hurricane that
was
went over his
tropical.
house.
Just changing
right?
your insurance.
But
Exactly.
but what
Yeah, I know.
That's what it is.
what happened with Hazel just got the same kind of deep trough that caught Sandy. It was snowing in the mountains of North Carolina
Yeah.
during Hazel,
Yeah.
just like it snowed in Sandy.
I'm very upset at Hazel. It chased me around on my honeymoon.
That Garrett is us. That's me and Josh right there. The blue dot. We're in the eye wall.
Wow.
It was
So-
sweet.
Ron, did you have any notion of going east of that eye, or was that not a?
You
not
mean
an
closer to the coast? You mean?
Yeah, just like being in the right front quadrant, or was that
Yeah,
just not an
we
option?
did. It was hard. The positioning was a little bit difficult there
Yeah.
because we'd found a couple of great positions north of Wilmington. When it shifted further into Wilmington, it actually reduced where we could go to because we were on the
Yeah.
coast until it actually hit
Right.
down there with other chasers and stuff. Vortex was down there.
Okay.
And SSL had their equipment set up down there.
Okay.
Apparently not for Michael.
Do you know Mark Suttis?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. Yes, I do. I follow Mark. Yeah.
This was Florence. Pictures.
Yep.
Europe.
That's the interstate there, right before the storm hit.
Yeah, excellent.
There's some tree damage.
Excellent
That right there is the
pictures, Joe.
flooding starting to take out the highways.
Excellent
That was
pictures.
just at the beginning. We literally had 5 minutes to get out of there. I told Josh, I said the water is overtaking the highway so fast. If we don't remember, we made the next exit, looped around, came back through, and the water is already coming over the interstate. He goes,
Wow.
What? And I say it's rising at like a foot every 5 minutes. It looks like. And then the highway patrol pulled in behind us.
Yeah.
Maria devastated the islands.
Yeah.
Yeah, kids
You gotta
stayed
thank-
off.
Well, because of Jose.
Like the
Yeah.
daughter-
Jose just sat there and sat there and sat there.
Jose took Maria out with it.
part of the circulation was over the northern Cuban coast. That prevented the.
Well, that was Irma, Dad.
Oh,
this
okay,
is
you're right.
Maria.
But Maria was so fascinating because it was just a classic setup to just point it right into the Carolinas. But Jose got locked in the middle
Yep.
of the ridge and weakened it just enough where it slowed down and just peeled off.
Yeah, it left it in alley to
And
leave.
just enough. Yeah.
The Great Hurricane of 1780. I think it was 3,095 people died in the islands with the Hurricane Maria. But the Great Hurricane of 1780 killed 27,500 people in the islands of the Eastern Caribbean with winds that they estimate over 200 miles per hour. It's one of 3 hurricanes that year with death tolls over 1,000. So
Wow.
That will leave a mark.
Well, another part of the
It
world, the
did.
cyclones of Bengal Bay have killed over 100,000 people. Huh?
Yeah. The Haifeng.
this
Yes,
is
they have.
Maria in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Jose kept. If Maria would have hit. Maria would have hit the East Coast, and it would have that kept 2017 from probably being an all-time year.
Yeah.
Because you would have had Harvey, Irma, and Maria.
Well, it's the sound of music. How do you solve a problem like Maria?
Yeah.
Put Jose in the way.
There's Irma and
Yep.
Andrew. The relative size, Andrew was a very small.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was.
Yeah.
Little buzzsaw.
Irma was a big storm.
Just imagine if that had gone over Miami.
John Hope. And the Labor Day hurricane plotted on the map, and Irma and Andrew, all 3 made the top 20 in terms of intensity.
Where's
All
Donna? Donna was worse on the Florida mainland, in Naples and those places than Irma. Irma was falling apart as she came to the coast.
We were in. Remember, we were in Jacksonville for.
Yeah, before Irma.
Yeah, we were playing. I was playing in a golf tournament, and at the time, the forecast was it was going to come up the eastern
Trying
coast.
to come up the East Coast.
And everybody was leaving 4 days out.
Yeah.
Southbound.
That's right,
Southbound.
we
You
couldn't-
could go 80
remember we
down. You
couldn't
could go now
we couldn't get
95, 80 miles an
gas.
hour.
When we go where there's a hurricane, we're the only ones in
Oh, it's
town.
awesome. Yeah, no traffic. It's
Now
great.
you better have your stuff together already,
Right.
your gas and your food.
4 days before, there were gas lines.
Yeah.
Wow, look
was-
at that.
Now, New York City is not immune from
fascinating,
hurricanes.
Joe, I'll tell
We remember Sandy in 2012, certainly, but between the 1800s and 1900s, very similar tracks for the most part, right? Hug the coast and
pretty
come straight
impressive.
north.
I wanted to point out that right at the beginning of the show, you had a list of ACE index years, and number 3 was 1893.
Right.
I believe that was one of the years that a hurricane came up the coast and hooked in and hit New York City.
Yeah.
And also it was, you're a better historian than I am, 1816, 1821, same thing happened.
Yeah.
And my point is, when you hear people, starting with Mayor Bloomberg Friday night before Sandy made landfall, saying there's no way the battery's going to flood because the hurricane can't
We'll be
turn that
open
way.
for business Monday.
It's unprecedented. These are the claims that were made in the wake of the storm, that it's unprecedented that a storm would take a track like that. Therefore, it must be the result of climate change. If they did their homework, they would know that that track has been in the record books for a long time. It's rare, but it is not.
Well, 1821.
You might find it in David Ludlam's book.
That's the place to look.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Donna, and now I finally found
That's
Every
that.
state, Hurricane
when
Donna,
you
every,
talk about-
every state from Florida to New England.
Yeah, that's never happened before. And, I don't know if it'll ever happen again, but every state from Florida to Maine had hurricane force winds.
Amazing
That
stuff.
is just a remarkable storm.
That's the storm that made me a meteorologist, because my family lived not even a half a mile from the west shore of Narragansett Bay in Warwick, Rhode Island, and the eye of the hurricane came over our house. And I was 7 years old, and my parents took my sister and myself out in the yard in the eye. This is after the winds were blowing 100 miles an hour or so, from one direction. We went out in the eye for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and we could see the dark clouds approaching. Come on, kids, back in the house. And from that point on, I was fascinated with the weather. Not only that, but I've met 3 other meteorologists for whom the same storm was the launching pad for their career in meteorology, because their parents in southern New England took them out in the eye of Hurricane Donna.
We were talking about it on the way up. I remember Hurricane Donna. We were still in Rhode Island at that time. And we had this, remember the cigar trees? We used to call them
Yes,
cigar trees,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
We had this big cigar tree, and it got knocked, I'll never forget, it was knocked over completely right in our
Cigars
front
for
yard.
everyone.
Now, my youngest daughter is named Donna Marie. It had nothing to do with the hurricane. I think maybe it was the Osmonds, I'm not sure. Anyway, here's a picture of Sandy. Is the wind gusts?
Well, I like to talk a bit about Sandy because during the afternoon on that particular afternoon was what, 2010, October 29th?
2012.
2012, okay. During the afternoon, the wind blew out of the northeast from 30 to 50 to 60 miles per hour for 3 or 4 hours.
In Atlantic City, right?
Summers
well,
Point.
I got to explain where I was living at the time. 12 miles southeast of Atlantic City, a place called Summers Point, Ocean City. The Atlantic was just 5 miles away. Then around, the barometer kept dropping all afternoon. And then around 8 o'clock, 8:15, the wind just calmed down. So I decided to step out in the front porch, right? And it was completely still. It was very warm and humid for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then the wind began blowing from the opposite direction, out of the south, coming out from Great Egg Harbor Bay, and Ocean City was 2 or 3 miles away. And it blew for about 3 or 4 hours, gusting up as high as maybe 70, 80 miles an hour. Next door house to me, tree went down on top of his house. Right. But I really feel that Sandy came over, the center of Sandy came over my house, then drifted west-northwest toward Philadelphia and eventually petered out.
What did the pressure read on your barometer?
2794 inches of mercury.
Wow.
And that's the...
What, 945?
But Matt, it
27,
wasn't a hurricane, it was a superstorm.
No, but what's fascinating about that is if you understand 1,500 millibar thicknesses and what the heights were over the storm, it had to be warm core because the pressure at Atlantic City was 35 millibars lower than at JFK. How is that not warm core? And then it wound very quickly.
And Joe, this is what the viewers need to understand. We're sitting here talking about thicknesses and all this technical stuff. The thermal structure of the core of a storm like that, it doesn't have fronts. It doesn't have a warm front, doesn't have a cold front. hurricanes are not based on contrasting air masses. They're warm. And as such, by definition, as you say, with the vertical thermal structure of that storm when it came wandering over toward the New Jersey coast was warm from top to
warm.
bottom. It was a hurricane.
In the center.
And the other thing too, it did not weaken. It did not, even though the clouds began to fall apart. The pressure only rose 3 millibars in those 6 hours to the coast, and in the following 6 hours, it rose close to 30 millibars. Right now,
I lived right across the fourth tee, and many trees went down off the fairways. The guys had a lot of work cutting
on the
up
south
trees.
wind.
Huh?
On the south wind,
The
right?
south wind,
Turned
right.
it into a
And
links
the other
course.
thing
It
that
immediately
happened
made it
in
less
Ocean
demanding of the
City-
driver.
In Ocean City, New Jersey, tons and tons of sand in the streets. One of the guys I golfed with lived on West Avenue about less than a mile away from the boardwalk. He said, Matt, I couldn't get in the first floor. He said, the first floor of my house was full of sand.
Wow.
Well,
They had bulldozers out there pushing the sand out.
all six of us are of the same mindset as it relates to hurricanes versus superstorms. The superstorm tag was a figment of the imagination of a producer at CNN or some other network.
News media.
It was a hurricane,
Right.
plain and simple.
No
It,
doubt about
it
it.
followed the idea of not issuing hurricane warnings.
Well, that's a topic for a
That's
whole show.
That's a whole nother show.
This is the
I didn't know if we wanted to
Reminds me of
dive into
Michael.
that or not, but I just thought I'd point that out.
This was
I'm a
incredible.
young rebel.
Thanks
I'm
for
allowed,
stirring it up
to
here.
say that.
This is incredible flooding in Manhattan. It filled Hudson, the tunnels to New Jersey, were shut down. Downtown up, fairly far up north in southern Manhattan had flooding, right?
Yeah, it was. That was one of the craziest weekends I ever had in my life. I had him with me.
Well, we were up in Rhode Island originally.
Because I was competing in the New England
Then we drove
Bodybuilding
down,
Championships.
and we were in the Fox News building, and it was just swaying. The belt, because the gusts were just so high up that high.
I'm glad you have this slide because I was just about to ask if we could describe and discuss the comparison with 1821 because it was worse. It could have been worse than Sandy.
It had the old record
yeah.
for the storm surge, but it was a low tide.
Ooh.
And the sea levels were a foot lower than 2012, coming off the little ice age. Only 155,000 people in New York City. But Sandy came in at 13.88 feet, but came in at high tide with a full moon and higher level of sea level, and 8 million plus people vulnerable.
Goes to what Joe Bastardi said a minute ago.
Yeah.
Pull all the perfect conditions together. You get a perfect storm. Why couldn't you have something worse and more
Yes, we
powerful?
could.
Yeah.
Bigger, more intense, slower. Any number of things come to it.
Right.
It would just
New York City
Amplify it.
didn't get the worst of Hurricane 38 further west. Wow.
Yeah, come. The restaurant in Narragansett,
And his
Coast
joke-
Guard.
Coast
Yeah,
Guard
Coast
House.
Guard.
All right, 12-foot wave from Hurricane Sandy hit that restaurant.
Gutted it.
No, yeah, right.
It's made out of stone, basically, piled stones, and some of them very large. Beautiful restaurant in Narragansett, Rhode Island, right on the ocean. And it turned out to be the superstructure of stone, and that was it when Sandy got through
Yeah.
with it.
Joe mentioned the snow in West Virginia with Sandy, and then
There was a couple runs like 6 days out where it was showing.
Yeah.
It was
Snow
showing
at State
snow from the
College.
State College. And it was like
he was on it.
nice little snow
Then
hurricane.
notice the heaviest rain again to the left of the track.
Yeah.
Because the upper low came in, and that's where.
No matter which direction it
Can I
tries
ask
to
a
come
quick
in.
question with everybody who understands computer modeling, maybe even better than I do? Have they ever gone back and reanalyzed how the computer models would handle some of these super hurricanes of the past?
I don't know if
What
they do or
what,
don't.
Yeah, what the European, with the GFS would do to them, would they get it wrong or right?
That's a
I
great.
don't know.
That's
Usually
that's actually
reanalysis-
something they
PhD,
should-
isn't it
they
ready to be
should do.
made?
Usually
Go for it, Gary.
reanalysis says, "Oh, we would have hit it."
Not that good with models,
Yeah.
but that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, it would be.
Let's talk about Harvey when we still have a little time. There was a
Wow.
big rainmaker.
Wow.
Now-
And let me get into this. The reason Harvey stalled was there was a strong, anomalously strong cold trough. There wasn't
Yep.
the heat trapping ridge. And the reason these rainfalls are that excessive is the storm stalled 75 miles from the coast, was just pulling in all sorts of tropical moisture. So it was the duration of the storm, 24 to 36, 48 hours with repeating bands. Now, you take Amelia in 1978, a scrawny little 40-mile-an-hour tropical storm, went into Corpus Christi and dumped 48 inches of rain. So this idea that, oh, it's because the Gulf is warm or whatever, it doesn't meet the smell test. And the other, you could tell I'm a little...
It smells all right.
About Harvey is that the rainfall was being forecasted because the storm was stalling, not because there was this Harvey.
Because it was raining that much harder,
Yeah.
or that much harder than any other.
Just
storm.
raining out over the same area.
Yeah, you just sit a storm in one place and feed in.
Like a train.
And
Right over.
in Harris County, you have 171 rain gauges.
Right.
Amelia, there's one.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, if they had 171 rain gauges in Central Texas around Amelia,
right, makes a
it's
difference.
probably higher than 48.
You know, one of the things I found interesting when the media was covering it, they said, we're in Buffalo Bayou covering this thing, and it's being flooded. And I thought, you think?
Yeah,
It's a bayou.
it's a
You just
bayou.
said what it is. It used to be a swamp. Of course it's flooding there.
Yeah, you got
That's
all
where all
that
the water's
concrete.
supposed to go.
I mean,
right?
And it has happened in Texas. Look, 6 of the top 10. Well, it may have changed, I guess, with Florence. I'll have to check.
Harvey was a big bad storm,
Yep.
but it wasn't as bad as Celia as far as the power of a 921 hurricane going into just north of Corpus. And no storm that I've seen hit Texas, even Rita or Ike, can match what Carla pulled in '61. Every coastal installation on the Texas coast had hurricane force winds, including all the way down to the valley.
It's incredible.
It was an amazingly big storm.
Yeah, we were at A&M then, Joe.
You can get a lot of rain in the winter, too, in Houston in 1935. They had 54.4 feet.
There it is, Buffalo Bayou.
I know, right?
Wow.
And
Get the 1900 Galveston.
oh, yes, I do. And you see the number of hurricanes per decade have not increased in Texas. This is the Galveston storm. 8 to 12,000 deaths, completely wiped.
Yep.
It looks like the pile of debris at Fox Point, Rhode Island, the 38 hurricane. That's what I was only that.
Does that count as climate-related deaths back then?
I guess.
Does it?
We could recount that.
Yeah. I don't know. I just don't know if that goes into the. Because apparently climate-related deaths now are as worse as they ever.
They've decreased.
But that's like the argument
Yeah,
that
exactly.
they're getting higher.
Ron had some images, and he went chasing after Michael. I don't know if these are. It was a very small
Very small.
storm. The damaged area was. Would you say how
Man, it literally, if you go, Panama City obviously got hit pretty hard, but you get down southeast of it toward Port St. Joe and everything, and the damage went down. Because, I mean, it did what a hurricane does, but not Cat 5, anywhere near that. Wow. Yeah, these are
Mexico?
That's why
Mexico Beach area.
That's why I have that power and impact scale, because
Right, yeah.
you could, a storm could be weaker at the center and spread out and do just as much or more damage.
Notice this mobile home?
tornadoes.
Yep. These are mobile homes standing 4 blocks from the ocean where the Cat 5 hurricane hit. That mobile home's about 1970. It's still standing.
Wow.
I have a question. How does that happen?
How is that? How?
Cat 5 will mow the ground down to nothing. I mean, it just disintegrates. There were a number of those standing. The oceans literally are the Gulf of Mexico.
Maybe it's
is
because of
behind
the
me.
flat that somehow the
I don't
other.
know, Joe. There's even probably a picture of the radio towers are still standing.
Did you see evidence of Category 5 damage? And I mean, you were through
honestly,
there.
that's never been my thing. I've always been
Right.
intrigued. I never study that part
Yeah.
of it. But as I'm driving, I know what a Cat 5 looks like damage,
Right.
and I'm like, wow. I came to the beach. I was coming from the north through Bluntstown, which I know the area very well, and I'm like, wow, it's bad, but not catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm driving along, and I said, I guess Mexico Beach. It was a different angle. I'm coming from the interstate. I'm
Right.
usually coming from Panama City, and as I come in like that, I'm looking forward. I'm at the beach before I know it, and that's where the damage is. I said, wow, 2 miles inland, there's nothing but tree damage. Even the subdivisions are still intact, and they're old. These are 15-year-old subdivisions. They're not so. I have a lot of questions.
Yeah,
I'll put it
absolutely.
that way. Those are the trees. These are all St. Joe. They planted these trees back 25, 30 years ago. Some of them recent. They clear cut the area for forestry, and then they replanted these here. So when people point to all the trees that have been knocked over, you're talking about non-deciduous. They're non-native to the area.
Right.
The ones that are native to the area were actually still standing, most of them. Now this is probably 20 miles inland. 15 miles.
Did you stick in the eye? Were you in the eye wall the whole time? Like it?
No,
you never,
no. Actually, we came down after. These
you
are
came
after
after.
in
Oh,
pictures.
okay,
Yeah,
you weren't
I
in
couldn't.
there.
It was my anniversary. That's my own story.
That's
I did
before we
for my wife.
leave
Yeah.
today. You were out chasing for 13 days and
Yeah.
this month. And when the storms moved from the Gulf, the second round was in the plains and to the east.
Yeah.
And Joe has written about last year was one of the quietest years on record certainly for strong storms. We've had 7 below the normal years in a row, and then this year becomes active again. And
Cold kills.
it's the cold. Look at the map on the left. When we were quiet, it was warm everywhere, as Joe showed. And this year, with extreme cold in the north central, that contrast zone is really what drove this.
There are indications to me that the planet warming has some very positive effects for the weather, among other things. Because I know a lot more people can grow things where it's warm than I don't see any orange groves yet in the Arctic.
The
so-
biggest thing man has to fear is cold, Joe.
Yeah.
Cold.
Go. And you've got some pictures here.
Yeah, there are several. This is the last day we were chasing. We actually caught 8 tornadoes. A couple of things I'll note. My wife is not a meteorologist at all. We were out there 17 days, and most of the days were foggy, cloudy. You know the wind turbines that are spinning? You know, the wind energy stuff? They were hitting the clouds most of the time. That's how low the cloud day was. So number one, you were getting no sun energy at all. Had we had real sunshine out there and really warmed it in the 80s and 90s, oh my gosh. That's number one. Number two, every day was just drizzly and foggy, so you couldn't see a tornado until it was about 3 miles from you because your base of it. Usually you're looking at a taller funnel. Well, now your funnel's been cut in half, so what you think is, you know, several miles away is really only a couple of miles away. So it was a very different year for that. Flooding was massive. Flooding was ridiculous. We had to turn around so many times we couldn't even.
Well, that's Gray's theory that the
Yep.
mid-latitudes start getting wet when the climate's about to cool and it dries out over the tropics. It's amazing watching what's going on now. I'm going to turn it into that.
This is near Plainview, Texas. That was a pretty big tornado. We actually had one form inside the. Most of them are rain wrapped. They were rain wrapped in West Texas.
Wow.
I mean, they looked like Alabama tornadoes.
I guess
They
that
were rain-
permadrought isn't doing real well.
Well, you know about that's called Joe. They never said that. No one ever said anything about permadroughts. Are you making that
kidding?
up? I'm just kidding. No.
The A&M
Trust me,
Texas.
I was trying to say
rail
somebody from Texas
Joe, I rail like
A&M
you
was
do.
making noise
I do
about
like
that.
you do, but I do it at church. I rail and I say, "Give me 2 minutes to talk about weather, then we're right into theology."
Well, thank you so much for being part of this second episode and first earlier. Thank you to Joe and to Matt and to Garrett Pistardi, to Herb Stevens and Ron Moore for
Pleasure.
your help
My
with this.
pleasure.
Been a
And
blast being here.
upcoming shows, we'll be talking about
Great.
preparations for the inevitable.
Your
because
charts were
it
very
will happen
descriptive,
again.
Joe. They told your charts were very descriptive.
Thank you.
And they told a lot of the
Thank you.
facts. Very good.
Joe, can I ask a question? If this hurricane comes along and you save the town of Hudson, are they going to build a statue in the middle?
We'll make sure of it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, well,